producer of Disney's Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, and The Haunted Mansion, Don Hahn. Imagineering legend, Tony Baxter. Former creative executive at Walt Disney Imagineering, Tom Morris. Interior designer of the Haunted Mansion, Tania Norris. And your host for this presentation, Doug Barnes of the Season Pass Podcast.
All right, Midsummer Scream. Wow, are you guys all in line for the Haunted Mansion right now? Oh my gosh, this is a lot of people. All right, guys, thank you so much for being here at Midsummer Scream. How many are you excited about this weekend? Best weekend of Halloween is right now. All right, so we are going to celebrate this little ride that's celebrating 50 years right down the street, known as the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland. You know, I've always looked at it as never just a ride, but this is actually a life experience, and it's something that sticks with you forever, right? So a part of your life really does, you know, Haunted Mansion is part of it throughout your life. So everything that you look at in theme parks and just themed entertainment in general, you usually end up judging it by the Haunted Mansion. So very happy to be here with you guys. This is a nice panel that we got stacked up right here, right? All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Of course, 50 years, Haunted Mansion, Disneyland, and this is me with my sister Rebecca. So this is when I was innocent and easygoing and stuff. 3 years old, 1982. And then after that, 25 years of complete confusion happened in my life. So my first visit to Disneyland, went there, and I remember two things after that visit. I remembered a head in a ball talking to me, made me scoot down in my seat. And then I remembered a giant eyeball staring at me, and I slid further into my seat. So as I remember coming back home after that trip, and I was like, okay, I don't know if I need to do Disneyland ever again. But I decided that, you know, at some point I'm going to grow up, right? So 5 years later, 1987, the parents are like, we're going back to Disneyland. You know, I'm 8 years old. I'm much stronger. I'm a bigger guy. I'm into, you know, facing my fears. So I'm like, I'm gonna test that Haunted Mansion. We're also here for this little ride that opened up called Star Tours. Tony, have you heard of Star Tours? Did you? Oh, okay. All right. Star Tours. Star Tours was awesome, by the way. And then
we got rid of the eyeball for you.
Well, you're jumping ahead of the story, Tony. No, but so we had the chance to go on Haunted Mansion, and I went through it, went through the rooms, the hallways, the doors, saw the head, Madame Leota, past her. I was like, yeah, I did it. I went past that. I went into the ballroom, saw them dancing, went into the attic, we went into the graveyard, and then we saw ourselves in mirrors, and we were done. And I was thinking, that was awesome. I'm so happy I got to do this again and not be so scared of it. Where's that eyeball? Where's that eyeball at? And so I asked my parents, I asked Mom, I'm like, hey, Mom, do you remember there was an eyeball that was staring at me? And she said, no. I'm like, no, there was. I know there was. She goes, son, you were 3 years old. I'm like, no, I know there was an eyeball. So I went to my dad. I said, Dad, there was an eyeball that was staring at us. And he's like, okay, son. So they thought I was insane, you know. So I went on in life for the next 20 years of my life until 2007. When I was at work, I work at a data entry place. It's just a bunch of cubicles. We have headphones to listen to music and podcasts, and I was really getting into podcasts at that time. I was listening to a podcast called Window to the Magic. And they were, there you go, we got 3 Paul fans over here. That's awesome. All right. So, and they played the audio to this ride called Adventure Through Interspace. There you go. Well, yeah. So my confusion of thinking that I was insane and fabricating things in my mind for 25 years all came to a halt right at the moment when when they started playing the audio and I heard magnification and I started hearing the music and all of a sudden I like jetted back to a 3-year-old sitting in the middle of an Omnimover vehicle, and then I realized I never made it up. That was really there. And the whole point of this story is to say that Bob Gurr was the beginning of my insanity from a 3-year-old to right now. My parents still don't remember that at all. I called them up. I'm like, do you remember that? And they're like, no. But Bob, so let's go ahead and start about the Dune Buggies a little bit. Did this vehicle actually start with Monsanto's Adventure Through Interspace, or did it start with the Haunted Mansion?
Everybody thinks the Omnimover, the Dune Buggies, started with the Haunted Mansion. How many of you know it never started in the Haunted Mansion? That was stolen from the Voyage to Interspace, which was 2 years earlier. But the big difference was we found out with the Voyage to Interspace, they have kind of a car that you could snuggle 2 or 3 people in. And it was our first time that operations found out a whole new side of guest behavior. Oh, yes, I'm not going to go in too far into that one, but...
I worked that ride for one summer. That explains so much, yeah.
No, that's all right. I was hired to do fun vehicles, and boy, that was the funnest vehicle up there. So, what did you want to know seriously about the Dune Buggies?
Well, I was wondering, since you were there when they needed it, what was the conversation that said, let's get this the Omnimover in to be the Dune Buggy for the Haunted Mansion?
Okay, if some of you remember the New York World's Fair 1964-65, there was 2 other attractions that had a continuous line of vehicles. That appealed to me from a good standpoint. If you have a chain of vehicles, you can't have a collision, so you don't need an anti-collision system. Okay, we got that one done. If the vehicles are following one another fairly closely, you're going to have a pretty good theoretical ride capacity. Well, these 2 vehicles that I'm talking about, one rode sideways and one followed the vehicle in front. So all you saw was the back of the hair of the people in front. Well, that's not fun. So I was sitting talking to John Hench, and he happened to have a candied apple sitting on his desk, and I just absentmindedly picked it up and twirled it, and I says, John, we could make a chain of vehicles that runs on a track, but instead of putting the body on the vehicle rigidly, I could put it where I could turn it and I could lean forward and lean back, and this would give the art directors and the storytellers a chance to direct the audience into each scene. And it would also save them time. As you turn from one scene to the other, you can turn quickly and have less time loss in the segue between scenes. And it was such a simple thing, and I says, John, we're going to move a bunch of people, and we just move them in all different directions, and I was a pilot at the time, and there was a thing called navigational aid called Omni Range. I says, John, this is the Omnimover. So you got to watch out what you call your first sketch, because your name got stuck, and we never got a chance to give it a proper name, so I'm sorry, but that's how it developed. The writers if you remember, the Haunted Mansion was going to be a roly crump, scary walkthrough, and you can't control people when you go from a sequence of one thing to another. And as they saw us developing the Omnimover at 1401 Flower in the back, we had a little test track. They said, oh my gosh, that solves our walk-around problem. So bang, the Haunted Mansion would have been sitting there kind of dormant for years figuring out how to do it. They said, we got it, we got the answers. So the Haunted Mansion changed and went in a whole new direction of the idea that you have directed scenes, you have all the gags that you want to do, and since the track had already been going to prove itself out very well, the Dune Buggies came to life.
There you go. And that's what it's legend for now. That's what we know the Omnimover for. I mean, many of us remember it from Adventure Through Interspace, but it's legend with...
Well, you ask a technical question, I'll give you the technical answer, yes.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Right on. So we are going to actually go on to Tony Baxter right over here. And Tony, so obviously the Haunted Mansion meant quite a bit to you in your younger years, growing up with Disneyland.
Oh yeah, because for about 8 of those younger years, it was not open.
Yeah.
So you'd ride the train and you'd look down through the slats in the thing to see if there was any construction work down below the train. And so finally when it went into production, of course I couldn't resist being a ride operator out there, and I snuck in. So here's a secret. One of those doors in the corridor of doors, if you look closely, it's got an exit sign on it. That goes outside into the rear of Disneyland. It also is an entry for an employee that's taking his break and going over to sneak into the Haunted Mansion. I remember walking in that door and then walking down to the Madame Leota seance. And I just sat there mesmerized until a security guard came by and hauled me back to the other side of the park. Anyway, this is kind of interesting, this shot here, because Steve Davidson had come up with the idea of putting a Christmas overlay on. And he brought me, I was the head of the park design group there, and he brought me in to show it to me. And it was just the night before Christmas in the Haunted Mansion. And of course, we had this brand new property, but it was a touchstone film, if you remember when it came out. So it wasn't exactly approved for Disneyland. But we were able to add that one word in there, and kind of the rest was history on making the duality of the shows we have in Disneyland and in Tokyo. And so that's, and the other thing would be the Hatbox Ghost, if you want me to go on.
Yeah, keep on going.
He was in there for the first week that I wrote it. And I actually had a little card that I found that has proof. If you look on there, you can see number 28, Ghost Hatbox. So it was actually maintained for a while, and about a week, and I think a little video showed up of it. But anyway, I thought I was the monomaniac about getting it back into the house, but it turned out Guillermo del Toro is obsessed with that character. So at one of the Comic-Cons, he announced, I'm going to do this Haunted Mansion movie, again, a sequel, and I'm going to have it starring the Hatbox Ghost, so we can finally get that in. They'll have to put it in the ride if it's the star of my movie. And in the years that came on, he actually had one built for his collection, and some friends of mine were able to do that for him. And he did an incredible storyboard and whatnot. And then it fell by the wayside. But we at the park decided, enough time has passed and let's get that guy in there. So the Hatbox Ghost. And I really think John Gritz did an incredible job of, staging that and everything, and it works really, really well. So that was that aspect. And I don't know if you want to go on to Phantom Manor yet.
Oh, there's plenty to talk about. Yeah, we'll bring up Phantom Manor. I just remembered it was a few years ago. I remember you let me hold that card.
Yeah.
and my hands started shaking. And I was like, because I was starting to sweat, and I was scared that I was going to destroy the card by just sweating on this thing from my holding the moment this legendary card. So I had to give it back to you really quick. I was
for me it was the opposite. I was going, I'm not lying. I really did see it there. And so I was so thrilled when a really bad 8mm movie showed up, where somebody actually captured this guy in there. So
yeah. Well, obviously you have been inspired. You've done a few attractions since then that are inspired by the Haunted Mansion.
Yeah. It was interesting. When we went to Paris, we did a lot of research about the Europeans and the French in general, in specific. And it turned out that they got funny. They loved Jerry Lewis, and he's just a national hero over there. But
of course.
They also love scary. I mean, the Père Lachaise Cemetery, for those of you that love Gothic cemeteries, a must. You must go there before you die, or go there after you die. Yeah,
I'll be there.
It was inspiration for Phantom of the Opera. Anyway, but they don't get scary funny. And that was the weird thing, because Mark favored the very comical things, and Claude Coates, who had ordered a screening of the movie The Haunting by Robert Wise, if you haven't seen it, it's a 1961, not the newer one from DreamWorks, but they watched that over and over again, and you can clearly see the doors in the haunted hallway pulsing and everything. That's from that movie, as is the wallpaper patterns that come to life. So there was a schism between Mark and Claude preferring the more frightening and Mark liking the humor. And so when we did Paris, we had the decision to make. Are we going to go humorous and keep it pure to that, or go scary? And I think we came down a little bit more scary on it, and they just redid it. I'm going to pitch something here. This great book just came out 3 days ago, just on Phantom Manor, and the redo of the ride is extraordinary, and they've even strengthened the story. It's real macabre. You watch the bride go from a young, beautiful thing to an aging corpse at the end of the ride. And so, yeah, 3 of these are on order. I was hoping I could hold it up for you today, but just didn't get here in time. But yeah, so it's just been redone. If you haven't seen it in the last year, you haven't seen it.
All right, congratulations on that, by the way, too. That's awesome. You know, and talking about it, you said that Haunted Mansion obviously is inspiration. Don, Haunted Mansion's been inspiration for you too. It's a big piece of your life as well, right?
Yeah, like Tony, I was one of the kids outside the gates of Haunted Mansion for years, waiting for something to happen inside. And I was also one of the teenagers inside the Dune Buggies making out with my girlfriend. I was much younger then. But it was, it was hallowed ground. I mean, what you said is really right. And when you're especially younger and you see that for the first time, it's amazing. And in the early 2000s, Disney had looked at its IP and the kind of properties it owned, and they said, well, we can actually make movies from some of the properties we own. So the first 2 that they greenlit were the Pirates of the Caribbean and I Love Rob. And he's going to be here later tonight, actually, for a screening of Haunted Mansion. And we started working on it, and we're both from animation. I had come out of, had finished Beauty and the Beast and Emperor's New Groove and some of those films, and he had done Stuart Little, and we started by going over to Imagineering and going through the library and talking to anybody that we could talk to who had worked on it, and looking at the kind of mythology behind it, the storytelling behind it. And then the coolest thing that I possibly have ever done in my life at Disney is we went to the park at about 6 o'clock one morning and turned the lights on in the attraction and walked through it. And it was amazing and kind of humbling, because it is, for me anyway, it was kind of a humble setting. You look behind the scenes and it's plywood and it's blacklight paint and it's things that, to the eye might look very common, but then you turn the lights off and it's the coolest thing ever. So
like the stage right behind us.
It was just an amazing kind of theater of it all. So we hired a great production designer, John Meyer, who actually recently just did the production design on Mary Poppins Returns. Huge fan of Disney, and we built the whole mansion. We thought we can't really do this in an existing mansion, so we built it in sound stages. So everything on the screen in that film is on sound stages, except for the exterior, which we built on a ranch out in Santa Clarita. So if you live out in the Santa Clarita Valley, the Haunted Mansion lives out there too, or lived out there. So then we spent 3 months with Eddie Murphy, which is a topic for a whole other discussion, and had a good time making the movie.
There you go. So obviously it's such an important piece of Disney's history, because they wanted to make a movie out of that, like they did with Pirates of the Caribbean. One was absolutely amazing. And then, you had the great job on Haunted Mansion. You guys make sure, if you're at the gala tonight, to be there tonight, because it should be a ton of fun.
There's so much to talk about. It was intimidating too, because Pirates of the Caribbean with Johnny Depp came out right before Haunted Mansion, and Eddie Murphy's last movie was Pluto Nash, which was a great movie. Really, you should see it. We did the best we could, and everybody strives incredibly hard to make these movies, and we had people like Rick Baker, who's an amazing guy. So part of the fun for me was just hanging out with people like Rick and our composer and some of our special effects guys, just to be able to kind of find out how they approach their stagecraft to turn it into this film. So it was a great experience in the end.
Awesome. I just want to say those sets were incredible, and I'm glad to hear Mary Poppins was by the same guy. But we were going to bring the conservatory to Disneyland, because I always felt when you step into the Dune Buggies, you're kind of in a nowhere land, and we had that all mapped out. It fit perfectly. But then the movie came out.
Hope springs eternal. You try to make good movies, and sometimes they win, and sometimes they win less. There's so much I could say. The stairway, though, in Gracie Mansion, the stairway, we ended up shipping to the Disney MGM Studio Tour at the time down in Florida, and it was an attraction on one of the sound stages down there, because I just couldn't stand throwing that set in the dumpster. And that's what was going to happen. So we just called everybody I knew, and we ended up shipping a portion of that down to Walt Disney World.
Awesome. Right on. Well, Tom, you've been inspired quite a bit by this attraction too, and you really went deep in studying this thing too, as well.
Right. Oh yeah, there's a shot right there. This is from the Vic Green collection, who he was one of the architects in the later part of the history of the Haunted Mansion. Bill Martin. Actually, a lot of people were involved, as you all know. And I was one of those kids, just to back up a little bit, also, drooling on the gates of the Haunted Mansion back in the 60s and wondering when it was going to open.
For anybody who doesn't know, why is everybody standing at the gates drooling at it? Why couldn't they go in?
It was, there were rumors already, I think by like 65, 66, there were rumors that, started to get out there, and they were persistent. This was way before the internet, of course, before social media, but the rumors, I think a lot of it, at least, I grew up in Orange County, and there were Disney executives who, lived around the neighborhood and whatever, and I think that might have had something to do, with kids overhearing things at the dinner table and then exaggerating or whatever. But I think that was part of the whole mystique. Is it really going to open or not?
But being a sneaky kid, if you rode the train, see that a girder area there? The black area below it was open between the railroad tracks, and you knew as long as there was nothing in that space, the ride hadn't been built yet.
So fast forward to the end of the 70s, and I actually get a job at Walt Disney Imagineering. And I'm too busy really to be, a detective or anything. And plus, at the time, it wasn't really cool to be, too interested in Disney and, to be a foamer and be working there at the same time. So, I kind of, just every now and then, if I had the opportunity to dig around, I'd dig around and just kind of take notes of things or whatever. But after 35 years of being there, I had a folder of really cool information and stuff. So I am now retired, and I am going to do a book eventually on the archaeology of Disneyland, and my whole thing is about uncovering new information, not retelling the same stories over and over again that you've heard, but finding new people who are involved, new information, new stories, new anecdotes, and why, obviously no one ever got hurt in there during those years, but that was part of the rumor mongering, was that it was so scary that, someone had a heart attack or fell in a snake pit. There were so many rumors. Those were two. But why did that rumor persist? I always thought that was really interesting, that it was so strong and so persistent, and even showed up a little bit in newspapers from time to time. And I can swear even hearing something on TV about it one time on the news. And but obviously there was never anything in there built significantly. But things did happen in there. There were workers that went in there from time to time, and the elevators were in there the whole time. And that was one of the reasons why they would have to go in there. They'd have to fine-tune the elevators. They would have to test them. There was actually an issue with them that they uncovered early, thankfully, that required some rework. So, if you were backstage, you might see people coming in and out of that cavern that you just saw in there. And then in later years, it was actually a parade break area for the parade. It's where the parade went. Fantasy on Parade I can't remember what the route was, but it went through Frontierland, and then it would park in that it was basically a big garage for the parade. And so, who knows what strange things might have, occurred in there that might have started rumors. Anyway, this is a shot that, if you see my presentation tomorrow, you'll find out a little bit more about this shot. It's interesting. This is the graveyard. It's referred to as the South Graveyard, and this was originally going to be one of the exits to the attraction. And each exit was going to have 3 exits within that exit, because you were supposed to find your way out. So that's where that line came from. And this gentleman here is Dave Jacobs, who you may remember. And he's standing in front of one of the openings that's just right now in that picture. I think it's either a board that's painted black, but they had 3 of these little holes, little hamster holes coming up out of the Haunted Mansion, and you were going to exit. You're going to have to find your way out in some sort of maze-like thing before that, and then eventually you'd come out in this graveyard, and there'd be more fun little things in the graveyard. And the same goes for the other side. On the north side, that was also going to be an exit. This is when it was going to be a walkthrough, obviously. And this is a photo when they started building. Okay, so no one will believe this. I didn't believe it. I had one of those things where your memory is playing tricks with you, Tom. I left Disneyland. I went on a trip one time. I was really little. And as we were leaving Disneyland, this is 1969, April 69, because it was a birthday that we went to for a friend of mine. And we are leaving the park through the exit, and I see this building finally going up behind the chain link fence, which would be right where the Haunted Mansion would be. And it was still a skeleton of a building. And I'm like, oh, they're finally maybe going to do the Haunted Mansion. Then years later I went, April 69, you are, what are you smoking? There's only a couple more months left. Well, it was April. This picture is taken in either late March or early April. And they just worked fast back then.
And they built two of them at the same time because all the material, all the animation, everything was at WDI when I came there in 70, and they've been cycling to make sure it would last for Walt Disney World.
Right. Now this is the North Cemetery, the North Graveyard. It's already been filled up with dirt, so it actually goes down much lower, and you see two of they're referred to on the structural drawings as leave outs, which means don't pour concrete here, leave a hole. And so there were three of those leave outs on that side. The one that you see in the lower right-hand corner was eventually used to put the moving speed ramp up through, and so you exit through that little hole right there. But it very much was intended to be a walkthrough. It was going to be two separate walkthroughs. I've kind of seen chatter on some of the websites, that kind of hypothesize whether or not, and people debate, whether that is true or not. But I can tell you definitely it was going to be two separate walkthroughs. Each elevator would be dedicated to one walkthrough, and then each of those walkthroughs would exit in their respective graveyard. And they did a few drawings of that, including Carol Clark, the famous art director, who was the art director for Mary Poppins, was asked by Walt to work on this and lay out some of the rooms for this walkthrough version. And Yale Gracie was already he was specifying props for it. It really was going to open in 1964 or 65. They wanted it to open in 63. They were planning for it to open in 63. Yale Gracie was purchasing props. They were buying the glass for it in 1963, or at least big giant sample pieces of the glass. And Yale had his list. Carol Clark and Marvin Davis had done layouts for it. And even Mapo started engineering some of the machinery that eventually ended up in the show. Now, whether they built the machinery, I would love to find out, and whether that informed what would eventually go inside of the attraction. So that's something I'm kind of in the middle of right now. So I've kind of snuck these four, even though they're from Vic Green's collection. There are many, many more, and I hope someday to get this into a book about not just the Haunted Mansion, but about the archaeology of Disneyland in general. It's going to have to wait because I'm doing another book before it that is a little bit more urgent, that will trace the original Imagineers, track down missing Imagineers who we've never heard of before. Because there's not just one sitting here next to me. There are many, many more that you've never heard of and that did amazing things.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said again, so you're doing the archaeology of Haunted Mansion presentation tomorrow at 4?
Tomorrow at 4.
Which stage?
I don't know. You tell me.
One of the stages. Look on your map there.
One of the stages at 4 o'clock. So I'll dive into this a little bit more, into the history. My focus on it is from the time they decided to do this house in this location, not the Ken Anderson version of it, which another great panel will be at the D23 on the Ken Anderson version from 1957 to, well, it was mostly 1957. I think it might have lingered on until 59. My focus is on this version with the New Orleans Square and all of that. And there's some interesting little surprises and twists and turns involved with it.
Awesome, awesome. And then we have here Tania Norris. Tania. So, Tania, you were in WED and also an interior designer for Walt Disney. So can you tell us, like, how did you get into WED?
By accident. I had arrived in America in 1963. I did my training as an interior decorator in London and had some experience. But I'd made friends with an antique dealer who called me one day. At that point, I'd opened a very small office and was doing some model homes. She said, "I've heard of a job for you." I said, "Oh, forget it. I've got enough gray hairs." She said, "No, this is with Disney, and it's 1880s, and it's based in New Orleans." She said, "It sounds really up your alley." So I said, "Well, all right. I've heard of Walt Disney." So that following, I made an appointment for an interview on a Wednesday. That Sunday, my husband and I went to Disneyland. We walked down Main Street. We went into one of the areas. We had a hot dog, and I think we walked back down Main Street. And the interview on Wednesday, I could say, honestly, I had been to Disneyland. I was interviewed on the Wednesday, and I didn't think I stood any chance at all of being employed, because there were a great many very sophisticated younger people, or young people, with great portfolios and cute little sports cars. And I had 4 pieces of paper from places around the world that I had decorated, and that was it. I didn't have any great sketches. So I had a second interview on the Thursday with Emile Coury, Bob Brown, and I think John Hench. And then Emile Coury was head of decorations at the studio for the films. But he had also had a hand in some of the design for Disneyland up till that point. I had a call on the Friday and said I had the job, and I remember sitting back in my chair and saying, "McKnight, you're an idiot. What have you got yourself into?" And I started work the following Monday, and for a couple of weeks or so I finished up my work and went into WED 2 or 3 days a week. Bob Brown, who was Walt's son-in-law, husband of Sharon, was my immediate boss, and then John Hench was above that. And Dorothea Redmond, whom I'm sure most of you have heard. Absolutely incredible artist. Dorothy and I worked very closely, and I had, before I went to work at WED, I had done architectural renderings. But as soon as I went to WED, and Dorothy and I would be talking, and I'd be describing something to her, as I'm describing it, it's appearing on the paper. I said, "That's the end of my sketches, forget it." And I didn't do any other. And so that's how I happened to go to WED. And at that time, I think there were 29 employees. And then it split up into various other groups. We were a little house in the corner of Sonora. And may I go back to something about the Haunted Mansion? In my memory, and I think many of you will agree, that one of the wonderful things about Walt as a genius was his timing for various events to happen, so that the public were always kept in suspense. And in my memory, that was the Haunted Mansion. And the various Haunted Mansions were not made because Walt said the time is not right. And that's when the time was right, and he said, "Go ahead." And that's when we got involved with the Haunted Mansion. Now, some of these gentlemen, they were doing it for fun. I was doing it as a job. I got $125 a week. And but it was a most interesting time to be at WED. I worked with Walt Disney, and I actually traveled to New Orleans with Walt Disney, his wife Lily, his brother Roy and his wife Edna, Bob Brown and his wife Sharon Disney. Claude was there, Claude Coates, Herb Ryman, who was there, Bill Evans, who was the wonderful landscape designer for so much of Disneyland and also Walt Disney World. He was there. And I think 1 or 2 others whom I've forgotten. Bill Martin was there. And there is a photograph of myself with Walt in New Orleans, outside in front of the Gulf Stream, which we were about to board. And as you see, we dressed formally. I mean, no, it's true. I never went to work in pants. We had suits, I had pearls, handbag and gloves, and that's how we dressed to go to work. I would never, well, I don't even own a pair now. I don't own any jeans, but I would never have dreamt of going to work in jeans. We were very formally dressed. And from New Orleans, we went to Florida. It was a hole in the ground. It's called Project X. And Bill Evans had already brought trees from throughout the world, and they were in Florida hardening off so that when the park was built, they would all be acclimatized to the conditions in Florida. From there, we flew to New York for the World Fair. And let me go to Walt. A couple of stories. Do we have time?
Absolutely, go for it.
Thank you. As you see, I was quite young, and only my hairdresser knows how much gray hair I have now. In New Orleans, Walt knew I had not, we'll go back to the plane, because I was young, as you can see, or younger, and I was sick on the aircraft. I was so embarrassed, I was so nervous. We tried not to let Walt know, but he found out. So every meal on that trip, when the waiter or waitress would come along and ask for our drink order before lunch or dinner, he would say, "She doesn't get a drink." That was fine, I didn't really mind that much. The last night, Lily turned to him and she said, "Oh, Walt, for goodness sake, let the girl have a drink." And he said, "I will not add to the juvenile delinquency of America. She doesn't get a drink." And I never did. I never got a glass of wine. But in New Orleans, knowing I had not been there, he insisted we have breakfast in the hotel. And many times I would go meet him in the suite they had, and he'd be reading the newspaper with his slippers on, and we would talk about what I had done the day before, because I was going to every antique shop in the Vauquerie in the Old Town to buy and search out antiques for New Orleans Square and the shops there, and also for the Club 33. And I would report, and I'd show photographs. Sometimes I would bring the items, and we'd discuss it with Bob Brown and Walt. And then we would go for lunch and dinner to a different restaurant so that he would introduce me to the cuisine of New Orleans. In New York, he insisted that the chauffeur drive a different way, different route every day to World Fair so that I would see New York. Now those are some of my memories of Walt Disney. His kindness to me. He used to come in the back door at WED, look at the things on my desk, and he'd say, "What are you spending my money on today?" And I'd show him. And he said, "I like that," and he'd walk and water. And I was very fortunate to help go antique shopping with Lily and Diane. I did the interiors, or helped Diane and Ron when they bought their ranch out in the valley. And then Bob and Sharon, I would help them, and I took Lily and Edna antique shopping, who had a great sense of humor, sweet lady. And it was a very wonderful time. At the same time, when I see people saying, "Well, I did this and I did that," and all these names and things, we did it as a team. And our mantra was to have detail and authenticity. Those were what we lived by and researched.
History with Walt Disney, and they're traveling a lot with him. And you finally had a chance to go back to Disneyland recently and visit the Haunted Mansion.
I did. You know, it's 50 years since I left, since I was in Disney. And the trip to Disneyland 2 weeks ago was quite thrilling. But my goodness, how much has changed. And change is a good thing, and change is, I was saddened to see, just because of my fond memories, that some of the things that I did in the Haunted Mansion had totally changed. I remember buying a lot of junk, good things that went into the attic. There was a children's pram, there was all kinds of antique stuff and lots of cobwebs, and it really looked like an attic. Totally changed. The wallpaper, the purple wallpaper. Now, there's some history there that still has to be discovered. But I remember doing doodles for it. And I remember when I saw it the first time, hung in the Haunted Mansion, kind of kind of saying, I did that, and nobody knows. Because nobody did. We didn't put our names on things. The wallpaper's totally changed. If you see the original, it's much more flowing, and instead of cutesy little owls, you have kind of abstract bat ghosts, totally different, but still the same color and the same intent. But that's the kind of things that were changed. Much has changed, and it has two things wear out. Everybody has their own idea, but hopefully they have kept authenticity and detail and cleanliness as the three things that Walt wanted in that park.
Yeah, absolutely. So, listening to your story, Tania, and I imagine this goes for many people, especially here on this panel, you know, as years continue to go on and you continue to ride on a Haunted Mansion, sometimes it might, things change a little bit. Sometimes maybe it tells you a different story than it did before. Do you ever see new things when you go through a Haunted Mansion? Any one of you?
Oh, well, that's simple. Nobody messes with my Omnimover. Here's an interesting thing. Tom has really shown everybody here something a lot of people didn't appreciate. You'd think normally a project starts, goes, opens, and that's that, and we go off to do something else. That Haunted Mansion thing was an idea that just kept percolating and percolating all the time. There's so many people messing with it, and to see all this concrete, all this earth moving and everything, and then late into the job, they adopt my Dune Buggy, and it turns into a demolition zone. So the change that occurred was before we opened. Think about it. All that work,
Right.
and somebody had a bright ideas to do things really, really neat, and the company had no fear to tear up stuff and do it really, really good.
It looks like in 1964, maybe when the machine shop finished with their work on the World's Fair, rather than laying everybody off, you know, a lot of people were kept with the knowledge that in '65 there was going to be, you know, a lot more things. And it looks like they may have been doing some of the mechanical drawings for some of the things that we see in there today, like the floating candelabra. I found a whole series of drawings, of mechanical drawings for.
Well, that's right. The machine shop, in those days, we knew a lot of things we were going to use and other stuff that still had to be developed. We didn't want to waste any time as long as we had talented people in our maple shop to be able to do that. In fact, what's also interesting, everybody asks the question, why did the Haunted Mansion get built so soon, but there was no attraction, no ride until many years later? Well, we had a guy that ran the drafting room for the architects over at 800 Sonora, Harvey Gillette, very strong-minded architect. He liked his building after they decided not to make it like a ratty thing like one of the Anderson drawings. Somehow Harvey pushed for, we'll finish my drawings and we'll pour the foundation and we'll build my building and then you can continue on later. That's the answer, how that happened.
Oh, right.
One guy liked his building that much, he pushed until he got it.
There we go. That's it right there. That's why that thing's been standing there for so long, well before the ride. That's incredible. And the other thing, too, I noticed is that I've always felt that the Haunted Mansion really is like the best way of storytelling an attraction. I think it's the best way to really reach somebody. But I think it's storytelling, but I think every person has a different story that they walk away with after they experience it, right?
I've always said that I think the best story in Disneyland is Peter Pan. It has one line to the story. Come on, everybody, here we go. And from that point on, it's you flying through the bedroom and out over London, and you flying off to Neverland, and you writing your own story. I think movies are, by their nature, they tell us stories within the movie. But at Disneyland, the best experience is you go home with a story that you created while you wrote it. And I think the Haunted Mansion is one of those rich experiences where, yeah, the guy is talking to you in the Dune Buggy, but the real story is being written in your mind by what you're picking out of that and seeing it. And to your other question about, the changes, we don't have a filter like Walt Disney that we had one to manage to know what all of us wanted before we knew we wanted it and build it like Steve Jobs did also. And now some of the things are good. I think the Hatbox Ghost, I'm really proud of how that came out. There are other things I don't like. I think one of the things we really need to do with technologies that are out there today and the ability we have to convert them into dimensional things is a little bit of stepping up to that line and going in there and touching some of the sacred things. I really think it's time to do that. I'd love to see Madame Leota done today with what I know we could do in that crystal ball. Because when I was a kid, watching a movie projected on a mannequin head was very exciting. But today, it's time to move on to that, and I know we have things that could do that. So I think hopefully that you'll all be impressed with the things that change, and that's part of life, and I think we owe it to the future kids to be just as excited about that. The worst thing could be for it to become a museum of things that were really exciting to us back in 1969. The theory of it, of going into a place and getting the bejesus scared out of you, is still really valid. And so how you do that, though, is so much trickier in an audience as sophisticated as you are. You can probably go out the door today and buy a lot of the tricks that we have in the Haunted Mansion out on that floor.
That's true.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of space in there still.
Is
There's
there?
a lot of room. Well, there's a lot of surface space in there. When you go up the staircase from the load area, there's opportunities to begin the mood a little bit sooner and to begin to offer some things in there. And there is a lot of physical space. There's a lot of moments, and I think in opening it, you don't necessarily want to overwhelm or put so much in there, that you can't keep track of it. But this has such a repeat audience that I think it lends itself to adding more and more little surprises here and there every year. And Florida has done that. Again, kind of, some things are more successful than other things, but I think that is the great thing about it. It would be to come to it every year, and there's something new in it every year. That becomes a part of the collection. And then when something becomes old and not really amazing anymore, then it's time to change that out.
Don, you had something?
Well, I was just going to pile on to the idea of storytelling. There's something that happened, of course, when Disneyland opened, and there were these large kind of experiences like Frontierland or Tomorrowland or whatever. But something about New Orleans Square and Pirates and the Haunted Mansion became these bigger narratives all of a sudden. And being a kid and even going there now, you just realize the level of storytelling. And I don't know, it was certainly a team effort from a number of people, but you have people like Mark Davis and Dean Tavoularis, who designed a lot of the mansion things, who went on to be a production designer for Francis Ford Coppola. And so a lot of people from the film industry who were trained in narrative storytelling and doing art direction, production design for storytelling contributed to that whole area. And there was something about the step up of that early 60s and the work they were doing that was really profound, I think.
1962, someone told me, it might have been Buzz Price's son, David, might have been, said, "Oh yeah, that's the year Buzz said Walt bit off more than he could chew." Because he was starting up the World's Fair. He was at Disneyland. It was not only New Orleans Square, it was the Tiki Room, which was first going to be a restaurant, but now it needs really to be its own little attraction. And it was the Tree House, and it was reconfiguring part of the Jungle Cruise and tearing out the train tracks on the west side of Disneyland. There were also some other projects that were percolating out there, big projects that never happened. But in 1962, I think that's the most interesting year, not 1959 or 55 even. but 62, when his imagination and his mind and his ambitions were going all over outside of the gates of Disneyland to other places. And this New Orleans Square was like, oh, if we're going to move the train tracks, then we might as well build a basement in there. Put a basement in, and we'll figure out what to put on. It'll be New Orleans Square, but we'll figure out the details of that later. And while you're at it, dig the culvert for the Haunted Mansion, called the Haunted House at the time. So all that was kind of done, just like, get it done, it makes sense. You know, you had the operations people saying, yeah, that makes sense.
Such a different world this day.
And you had food people, because apparently the west side of the park was, there was not enough food in Disneyland in general, and then in 1959 when they opened all that stuff and the attendance went up, they were really scarce of food. So Walt was already interested in the idea of underground utilidors and that sort of thing. So we need more food capacity, so put all that stuff down in the ground, and then we'll build a New Orleans on top of it.
Incredible.
There was an interesting thing following up on what Don said. In the movie Cinderella, Walt was criticized because a lot of contemporary animation at that time was going very stylistic, and it was very literal and very believable. And Walt came back said, if you didn't buy into the worlds I create for Cinderella to live in, then you're not going to believe in the magic when it comes time in the story for that to happen either. And I think a lot of what happens with New Orleans Square and the better things that work at Disneyland, it's so easy for you to buy into the story because it's so well done that you're willing to take a further leap than you might if it was just something you encountered at a carnival or a traditional way. So I think that was the leap that Disneyland in general took. And I agree with you, New Orleans took it to the ultimate believability.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom.
Well, New Orleans Square was why I was hired. And the research into that was intense. We went, as you told you, to New Orleans. We bought things there to bring back. Pieces of the iron were replicated. I actually was the one that did all the colors for the original outside, exteriors, and the interiors. And we bought a lot of furniture which went into all of the shops, really. One person I'd like to mention, because I'm sure you've all been to the perfume shop, was an artist called Glenda von Kessel, who was an absolutely wonderful lady, and she did all of the reverse paintings, which took, I think, about 2 years from start to finish. Please do look at that. And think, when you go to Disneyland, don't just think of the rides. Okay, we'll go to the Haunted Mansion, we'll go here. Please look at the detail. Remember that going down Main Street, I think is eighth scale. I mean, it's not full scale, you don't realize that. Look at all the little detailing. That's what, to me, has made Disneyland part of the success today. And that's what Walt wanted. He wanted the detail. He wanted the authenticity. He didn't want you to really jab it at you, but he wanted it to be as you walk down. But please look and realize how much thought and effort. Disneyland's not a place for children. It's a place for people like yourselves that will appreciate what all of us do.
What do you guys think about that, It's quite amazing. All right, you guys. Well, I had a blast here just celebrating Haunted Mansion. 50 years. Can you believe that? I mean, it's a 50-year-old ride. But yeah, hopefully, it just continues on. It continues to thrive. It continues to inspire many people out there, like the ones that are walking out the door right this instant. Absolute inspiration. Yeah, they're going to Disneyland right now to go on the Haunted Mansion. But thank you guys so much for being here today. I cannot believe how beautiful it is. Thank you so much. Once again, all the way at the end, Bob Gurr, Disney legend. Film producer, Hahn. Disney legend, Tony Baxter. Former Imagineer, Tania Norris. And from Wood and interior designer, Tania Norris. I'm Doug Barnes. See the Past Podcast.